The sun was beginning its descent toward the western hills, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, when Jesus stood before the crowd that had gathered around him on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. He had been teaching all day long, speaking in parables about the kingdom of God, and the people had pressed in close, eager to hear every word. The sick had been brought to him for healing, the troubled had sought his counsel, and the curious had come simply to see the man everyone was talking about. But now, as the shadows grew longer and the day's heat began to fade, Jesus turned to his disciples with a simple instruction. "Let us go over to the other side," he said, gesturing across the sea toward the distant shore. The disciples, many of whom had spent their lives as fishermen on these very waters, nodded and began making preparations. They dismissed the crowd, telling them that the teaching was finished for the day, and helped Jesus into the boat they had been using. There were other boats nearby, and some of the followers decided to accompany them across the water, launching their own vessels to make the journey. Peter and Andrew took their positions, as did James and John, the sons of Zebedee. They knew this sea intimately, its moods, its currents, the way the wind could shift in an instant. They had fished here since they were boys, following in their father's footsteps, and the Sea of Galilee was as familiar to them as their own homes. As they pushed off from shore, Jesus made his way to the stern of the boat. The day had taken its toll on him. He had poured himself out in teaching and healing, and the weight of the work showed in his eyes. In the back of the boat there was a wooden seat with a leather cushion used by the helmsman, and Jesus settled himself there. The gentle rocking of the boat on the calm evening water was soothing, and within moments his eyes closed. His breathing deepened and slowed, and he fell into a profound sleep, his head resting against the cushion. The disciples smiled at one another, noting how deeply their master slept. They had seen him like this before, so completely given over to rest after giving so much of himself to others. They spoke in low voices as they worked the oars and adjusted the sail, not wanting to disturb him. The boat moved steadily across the water, cutting through the gentle waves with a soft, rhythmic sound. The Sea of Galilee stretched before them, perhaps 7 or 8 miles from where they had launched to where they were heading. It was not a large body of water, one could see from shore to shore, but it was deep, nearly 200 feet in some places, and it lay in a basin surrounded by hills and mountains. This geography, the disciples knew, could create unpredictable conditions. Cold air from the mountains could rush down and collide with the warm, moist air rising from the water, spawning sudden and violent storms. But for now the evening was peaceful. The water reflected the darkening sky like polished bronze. In the distance, they could see the lights of small villages beginning to appear along the shoreline. Some of the disciples talked quietly among themselves about the things Jesus had taught that day. Others simply enjoyed the respite, the gentle exercise of rowing, the coolness of the evening air on their sun-warmed skin. Matthew, who had once collected taxes and now collected the words and deeds of Jesus in his mind, gazed at their sleeping teacher and marveled at how his life had changed. Philip and Bartholomew discussed what they thought Jesus meant by some of his more challenging parables. Thomas looked thoughtful, as he often did, pondering questions he would later ask. They were perhaps halfway across when the first gust of wind hit them. It came suddenly, without warning, and it was strong enough to make the boat lurch to one side. The disciples who had been relaxed immediately became alert, their fishermen's instincts engaged. They looked at the sky and saw that the stars had disappeared. Dark clouds had rolled in, thick and heavy, moving with unnatural speed across the heavens. "Storm coming," Peter called out, his voice carrying the authority of experience. "Secure everything, be ready on those oars." But even as he spoke, the wind intensified. What had been a strong gust became a howling blast that tore at their clothes and hair. The sail snapped and strained against the ropes that held it. Within seconds, the gentle waves that had been lapping at the sides of the boat transformed into something altogether different. The water began to churn and heave. Waves rose up, growing taller with each passing moment, their tops whipped into white foam by the screaming wind. The boat, which had been moving so smoothly just moments before, was suddenly tossed upward as a wave passed beneath it, then dropped sickeningly into the trough behind. The disciples grabbed for whatever they could hold on to, their knuckles white with the effort. "Get that sail down," John shouted, and several of them fought to lower it before the wind could tear it to shreds or capsize them. The canvas whipped and cracked like thunder as they struggled with the ropes, finally managing to secure it. But the storm only grew worse. The wind seemed to come from every direction at once, howling like a living thing that wanted to devour them. The waves grew monstrous, mountains of water that towered over the boat before crashing down with terrible force. Each wave sent cascades of cold water over the sides, drenching the disciples and beginning to fill the bottom of the boat. Lightning split the sky, brilliant white forks that illuminated the churning water for split seconds before plunging them back into darkness. The thunder that followed was deafening, rumbling and cracking like the very heavens were being torn apart. Rain began to fall, not in drops but in sheets, so thick they could barely see one another though they were only feet apart. "Bail," someone shouted. "Bail or we'll sink." The disciples frantically began scooping water out of the boat with anything they could find. Bowls, containers, even their hands. But for every bucket they threw out, another wave crashed over them and filled the boat even more. The water was up to their ankles now, then their shins, cold and rising steadily. The boat pitched violently, tilting at impossible angles. One moment they were climbing the face of a wave that seemed as tall as a house. The next they were sliding down into a valley of water, the waves looming over them on every side. The timbers of the boat groaned and creaked under the strain. These were experienced sailors, men who had weathered storms before, but there was a desperate edge to their movements now. This was no ordinary storm. Peter, his beard and hair plastered to his face with rain and seawater, grabbed the sides of the boat as another wave nearly capsized them. Andrew was beside him, both of them using all their strength to keep the vessel upright. James had a rope burned into his palms from trying to secure the sail. John was bailing water as fast as he could, but it seemed hopeless. The others were scattered throughout the boat, some rowing with all their might to try to keep the bow pointed into the waves, others bailing, all of them fighting for their lives. And through it all, impossibly, Jesus continued to sleep. In the stern of the boat, cushioned against the helmsman's seat, he remained peacefully at rest even as the storm raged around him. Water washed over him with each wave, but still he slept. The boat lurched and rolled, but he did not wake. It seemed beyond comprehension. The disciples fought the storm for what felt like hours, though it may have been only minutes. Time lost meaning in the chaos. Their arms burned with exhaustion from rowing and bailing. Their throats were raw from shouting to be heard over the wind. Their eyes stung from the salt water. And still the waves kept coming, each one threatening to be the one that would finally send them to the bottom of the sea. It was Matthew who first voiced what they were all thinking. "We're going to die," he said, his voice barely audible over the storm. And looking at the situation, it was hard to argue with him. The boat was more than half full of water now. The waves showed no sign of diminishing. Lightning continued to slash the sky, and the thunder seemed to shake the very air around them. That was when Peter, looking toward the stern, saw Jesus still sleeping there. Something in him snapped, not anger exactly, but a mixture of fear and desperation and incomprehension. "How can he sleep through this?" he shouted to the others. Several of them turned to look, and they all felt the same confusion, the same desperate need. Here they were, fighting for their very lives, using every bit of skill and strength they possessed, and their master, the one who had called them to follow him, the one who had promised them they were on a great journey together, was asleep. "Wake him," someone called. "Master, Master!" Several of them stumbled through the water-filled boat toward the stern, grabbing onto the sides as the vessel lurched beneath them. They reached Jesus and shook him, not gently. "Master," they cried out, their voices cracking with fear and exhaustion. "Teacher, don't you care that we're perishing? Lord, save us or we're going to die." Jesus stirred, his eyes opening. For a moment he looked at the disciples gathered around him, soaked to the skin, terror written plainly on their faces. He saw the water filling the boat, heard the howling wind, felt the violent motion of the vessel. He took it all in with a single calm glance, then he stood up. The boat was pitching wildly, but he stood steady, his feet planted firmly despite the movement beneath him. He turned and faced the storm, and the disciples fell back, giving him room, watching with wide eyes. Jesus looked out at the chaos, the towering waves, the screaming wind, the lightning-torn sky. He raised his voice, and though he did not shout, his words carried a weight and authority that cut through the noise of the tempest. "Peace," he said to the wind and waves. "Be still." And in that instant, everything changed. The wind, which had been a roaring monster tearing at them with invisible claws, simply stopped. It didn't gradually die down or slowly fade away. It ceased as though someone had closed a door on it. The waves, which had been mountains of churning water threatening to overwhelm them, suddenly flattened. The surface of the sea became smooth, perfectly calm like glass. Not even a ripple disturbed it. The rain stopped falling. The clouds began to break apart, and through the gaps stars appeared once more. The thunder faded into the distance like a memory. The only sound was the gentle lapping of water against the sides of the boat, and the dripping of water from the disciples' clothes. The silence was profound, almost overwhelming after the deafening roar of the storm. The disciples stood frozen, staring at the calm water, then at Jesus, then back at the water. Their clothes still dripped. The boat was still half full of water that they had taken on, but the sea around them was as peaceful as it had been when they first set out. More peaceful even. It was as if the storm had never happened, as if it had been erased from existence by those two simple commands. Jesus turned back to his disciples. His expression was gentle, but there was something in his eyes, a question, perhaps a mild reproach. "Why are you so afraid?" he asked them softly. "Why are you so fearful? Do you still have no faith?" The disciples couldn't answer. They stood there, water dripping from their beards and hair, their hands still gripping whatever they had been holding when the storm stopped, staring at Jesus with a mixture of awe, wonder, and something very close to fear. Though this was a different kind of fear than what they had felt during the storm. Peter's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. John looked at his brother James, and both of them wore expressions of complete astonishment. Matthew, the former tax collector who prided himself on his ability to understand and categorize things, looked utterly bewildered. Thomas, who always had questions, had none now, or perhaps too many to know where to begin. Jesus stirred, his eyes opening. For a moment he looked at the disciples gathered around him, soaked to the skin, terror written plainly on their faces. He saw the water filling the boat, heard the howling wind, felt the violent motion of the vessel. He took it all in with a single calm glance, then he stood up. The boat was pitching wildly, but he stood steady, his feet planted firmly despite the movement beneath him. He turned and faced the storm, and the disciples fell back, giving him room, watching with wide eyes. Jesus looked out at the chaos, the towering waves, the screaming wind, the lightning-torn sky. He raised his voice, and though he did not shout, his words carried a weight and authority that cut through the noise of the tempest. "Peace," he said to the wind and waves. "Be still." And in that instant everything changed. The wind, which had been a roaring monster tearing at them with invisible claws, simply stopped. It didn't gradually die down or slowly fade away. It ceased as though someone had closed a door on it. The waves, which had been mountains of churning water threatening to overwhelm them, suddenly flattened. The surface of the sea became smooth, perfectly calm like glass. Not even a ripple disturbed it. The rain stopped falling. The clouds began to break apart, and through the gaps stars appeared once more. The thunder faded into the distance like a memory. The only sound was the gentle lapping of water against the sides of the boat, and the dripping of water from the disciples' clothes. The silence was profound, almost overwhelming after the deafening roar of the storm. The disciples stood frozen, staring at the calm water, then at Jesus, then back at the water. Their clothes still dripped. The boat was still half full of water that they had taken on, but the sea around them was as peaceful as it had been when they first set out. More peaceful even. It was as if the storm had never happened, as if it had been erased from existence by those two simple commands. Jesus turned back to his disciples. His expression was gentle, but there was something in his eyes, a question, perhaps a mild reproach. "Why are you so afraid?" he asked them softly. "Why are you so fearful? Do you still have no faith?" The disciples couldn't answer. They stood there, water dripping from their beards and hair, their hands still gripping whatever they had been holding when the storm stopped, staring at Jesus with a mixture of awe, wonder, and something very close to fear. Though this was a different kind of fear than what they had felt during the storm. Peter's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. John looked at his brother James, and both of them wore expressions of complete astonishment. Matthew, the former tax collector who prided himself on his ability to understand and categorize things, looked utterly bewildered. Thomas, who always had questions, had none now, or perhaps too many to know where to begin. Finally, Andrew found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Who is this man?" he asked, not to anyone in particular, but to all of them, to the air itself. "What kind of man is this?" "Even the wind and the waves obey him," Philip said, his voice filled with wonder. He looked at his hands, which had been bailing water just moments ago, then back at the perfectly calm sea. The other boats that had set out with them had also survived the storm, and their occupants were in similar states of shock. They looked across the water at Jesus standing in his boat, and they too asked themselves who this man could possibly be. The disciples began to bail out the water that remained in the boat, but their movements were slow, distracted. They kept glancing at Jesus, who had returned to his seat in the stern. They worked in near silence, each man lost in his own thoughts, trying to comprehend what they had just witnessed. They had seen Jesus heal the sick, remarkable certainly. They had seen him cast out demons, powerful and unsettling. They had heard him teach with an authority unlike any rabbi they had known. But this was something else entirely. This was power over the natural world itself, over the fundamental forces of wind and water. This was the kind of power that spoke of something more than a gifted teacher or even a mighty prophet. Who could command a storm and have it obey? Who could speak to wind and waves as though they were servants waiting for orders? The question hung in the air between them, unspoken but present in every glance, every wondering look. They continued their journey across the sea, rowing slowly through the now calm water. The night was clear and beautiful, the stars bright overhead, the air fresh and cool. It should have been pleasant, peaceful, but the disciples could not shake the sense of awe that had settled over them like a cloak. As they drew closer to the far shore, they could see the land rising before them in the starlight. Their destination was almost reached. But none of them would forget this journey, this night when they had seen something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the man they had chosen to follow, or more accurately, who had chosen them. Jesus sat peacefully in the stern, gazing out at the calm water, perhaps lost in his own thoughts, and the disciples rowed on through the darkness, their hearts full of wonder, their minds racing with questions, their souls touched by the mystery of the man who could calm a storm with a word. If you love God, like and subscribe for more stories like this.